The clock ticked loudly in the dim-lit kitchen, its steady rhythm echoing against the silence that had become the heartbeat of their home. She sat at the wooden table, staring at the chipped rim of a teacup, steam long faded, while across from her, her husband buried himself in the rustling pages of the evening newspaper. His glasses slid down his nose as he read line after line, never lifting his eyes, never noticing her restless fingers tapping against the table. Their house was comfortable enough, modest walls filled with practical furniture, a life built in years of routine and respectability. Yet beneath the quiet order, she felt an emptiness stretching wider with each passing day. The marriage, once filled with promises whispered in youth, had become a contract of survival. He worked hard, came home, ate, and slept. He was never cruel, but he was distant, and it was that distance that gnawed at her most, carving a hollow space inside her that no chore, no duty, no carefully prepared meal could fill. She had grown used to his absence even when he was sitting beside her. Conversations had become checklists. Did you pay the bill? How was work? Did you pick up the groceries? Nothing lingered beyond necessity. At night, he turned his back in bed, already drifting towards sleep before she even lay down. And in those moments, staring at the ceiling in the dark, she felt lonelier than she had ever imagined a married woman could feel. The loneliness pressed down harder with each passing week, and though she kept herself occupied, cleaning, writing letters, attending small gatherings, it did little to quiet the ache. Sometimes she caught herself glancing into mirrors, studying the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the soft wear of time on her face. She wondered if he even noticed her anymore, if he saw her not as a wife but as furniture in his orderly life. And then, one late afternoon, she saw him. It was at the small town market, where she stopped to purchase flour. The sun dipped low, painting the street in gold. He stood there, tall, confident, his shirt sleeve rolled to his elbows as he leaned against the wagon. His eyes caught hers, steady, lingering, as though he recognized her in a way her husband had long forgotten how to. She looked away quickly, cheeks burning with a flush she hadn't felt in years. It was nothing, just a glance, she told herself. But as she walked home, basket heavy in her arms, the memory of that look lingered, warming a part of her she thought had gone cold. For the first time in a long while, her heart beat a little faster. It began with polite exchanges, a greeting at the market, a brief conversation when she passed by his property. He was kind, unhurried, and when he spoke, his voice carried a warmth that filled the spaces her husband left empty. She told herself it was harmless, just small talk, yet each time their paths crossed, something stirred deeper. His gaze lingered a second too long, and when she answered, her lips curved into a smile she hadn't realized she still knew how to wear. At first, the conversation stayed innocent, whether work, community matters. But there was always an undercurrent, subtle and unspoken, tugging at them both. One afternoon, he complimented the ribbon in her hair, simple as it was. No man had noticed such a detail in years. Her husband would never. The remark unsettled her, not for its boldness, but for how it made her feel seen, alive, as if someone had finally pulled her out of shadows. She began to notice things about him in return. The strength in his hands as he lifted sacks of grain, the way his laughter carried when he spoke with others, the gentleness in his eyes when they rested on her. Each observation struck her with a pang of both joy and guilt. That guilt grew heavier in quiet moments. At night, lying beside her husband's turned back, she would close her eyes and tell herself it was wrong to think of another man. Yet her mind betrayed her, summoning memories of a glance, a smile, the accidental brush of his fingers against hers when they exchanged something at the market. The smallest gestures became sparks, setting fire to thoughts she could not extinguish. One evening, after town gathering, she found herself walking home alone. The night air was cool, the path dim under lantern light. He caught up to her, offering to walk her the rest of the way. She hesitated, then nodded. Their steps fell in rhythm, silence between them stretching taut. She could feel his presence at her side, steady and sure, and every breath she took seemed heavier with the weight of what was unsaid. As they reached the edge of her lane, he paused. The lantern glow cast shadows across his face, highlighting the line of his jaw, the steadiness of his eyes. He didn't touch her, didn't move closer. He only looked at her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. For a moment, She thought he would speak, confess something she was already terrified to admit herself. Instead, he simply nodded, bidding her good night. She walked into her house, heart pounding, hands trembling as she shut the door behind her. She leaned against it, closing her eyes. Nothing had happened, yet it felt as though everything had. The rain came without warning that evening, sweeping across the town in a sudden storm. She had lingered too long at the market, and by the time she hurried to shelter, she was drenched, her shawl clinging to her shoulders. The nearest refuge was his barn, lantern light glowing faintly from within. She hesitated at the door, heart hammering, before pushing it open. He was there, stacking crates. At the sight of her, he paused, surprise flickering across his face, followed quickly by concern. Without a word, he fetched a blanket, draping it around her trembling frame. His hands brushed her arms, firm and warm, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the rain. The silence between them was no longer harmless. It was charged, thick with all the words they hadn't spoken. She tried to steady her breath, but when his eyes met Hayes, steady and unyielding, she felt the loss of her restraint crumble. It happened slowly, then all at once. His hand lifted, hesitant at first, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. Her lips parted in protest, but no words came. She should have stepped back, should have reminded herself of the vows she had made, but her body betrayed her, leaning closer, drawn to the warmth and safety she had been starved of for so long. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with a force that made her knees weak. His arms wrapped around her, anchoring her, pulling her into a fire she had never known. It was stronger, harder, and beyond anything her body had ever experienced. Every kiss, every touch consumed her, drowning out years of silence and neglect. Time dissolved. The storm outside roared, wind rattling the barn, but inside, all she could hear was the thundering of her heart. She clung to him as if he were the air she had been denied, as if letting go would plunge her back into the emptiness she had lived with for years. When it was over, reality came crashing back. She sat on a hay bale, breathing hard, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. He stood a step away, chest rising and falling, his gaze locked on her as though afraid she might vanish. Neither spoke. The silence was no longer charged with promise, but with the weight of what they had done. She gathered herself, pulling the blanket tighter, and stood. Without looking at him, she whispered a trembling good night and hurried out into the rain. Her heart ached with both dread and longing. She had crossed the line, and nothing would ever be the same again. Section 4, the consequence 500 words. The days that followed felt heavier than stone. She went about her duties with a forced composure, preparing meals, tidying rooms, answering her husband's curt questions. But her thoughts never strayed far from that night in the barn. She could still feel his touch, hear his breath against her skin. And yet the guilt gnawed at her, sharp and unrelenting. Her husband noticed something, though he never named it. His glances lingered longer, suspicious perhaps, or simply confused by the sudden quietness in her demeanor. She avoided his eyes, avoided the warmth of his hand when he reached across the table. Every gesture felt like a betrayal. She told herself it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness carried away by storm and loneliness. And yet, when she saw the man again, passing in the street, standing at a distance, the memory surged back with a force that stole her breath. He didn't approach her, not openly. His restraint was as painful as it was merciful. A nod, a glance, a moment of silence was all they dared exchange. At night, she lay awake beside her husband, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Her body burned with memories of what she had done, but her heart was torn in two. She wanted to confess, to free herself from the weight pressing down on her chest, but she knew it would shatter everything. Her husband, her home, her reputation, everything would crumble. One evening, she passed the barn again. The door stood closed, lantern dark. She stopped, staring, as if expecting him to appear. But he didn't, and maybe that was for the best. Because the truth was clear, what had happened between them could not continue. It was fire, consuming, dangerous, and destined to leave nothing but ash. She turned and walked away, her steps heavy, her throat tight with unshed tears. Years might pass, and her life might continue in the steady rhythm of silence and duty. But one truth would remain with her forever. That night had awakened something inside her. It had shown her a passion stronger, harder, and beyond anything her body had ever known. And though she would carry the weight of it like a hidden scar, she knew she would never forget.